Welcome in. This is the Matricality, where I don't argue talent, I study execution. Tonight, I'm taking the framework from the last episode, how execution shows up under pressure, and applying it to a different matchup. This one isn't about predictions or reputations. It's about leverage. What actually has to happen on the floor for outcomes to change? Missouri and Kansas City. They come into this game with a clear efficiency gap on paper. Different profiles, different expectations, different margins for error. But gaps like that don't eliminate questions. They sharpen them. I'm going to break down what Missouri does consistently well, where they tend to create separation, and why they're favored at home. But I'm also going to look honestly at what Kansas City has already shown when the game is played on their terms, where they've been competitive, and what conditions keep them connected longer than expected. This isn't about picking an upset. It's about identifying paths. It's not, can UMKC win? It's how can a game like this stay alive, and where it usually doesn't. This isn't about narratives. It's about patterns. Talent isn't the question. Execution is. Let's get into it. Before we get into separation points and where this game usually tilts, it's important to ground this in what UMKC has already shown, not assumptions. UMKC just went into Arkansas and shot 50% from the field and 50% from three against SEC athletes. That matters, not because it predicts a repeat, but because it proves capability. When UMKC gets into half-court rhythm and the ball moves, they can score. They're not a volume offense. They're a selective one. And when the shot quality is right, the efficiency flows. They've also shown they're comfortable in games that stay flat longer than expected. Long possessions, fewer runs, fewer emotional swings. And that's the key distinction here. UMKC doesn't need to control the game. They need to stay connected. They've already proven they can do that against high major size and speed. So the question isn't, can UMKC make shots? We've already seen that answer already. The real question is whether they can make this game uncomfortable long enough for those shots to matter. So with that baseline set, let's anchor this to structure first, what the efficiency profiles actually say, before we talk about where chaos can bend it. On paper, this is a clear matchup. Missouri is operating at an offensive efficiency north of 107, while UMKC sits closer to 91. That's not a small gap. That's the difference in how consistently each team turns possessions into points. Missouri scores efficiently at all three levels. They shoot it well from the floor, they shoot it well from the three, and critically, they convert at the free throw line. UMKC doesn't have the same margin for error. When their efficiency dips, there's nothing propping it up. The next separator is on the glass. Missouri ends possessions. Their defensive rebounding rate is solid, and they don't give teams extra chances. UMKC, on the other hand, struggles to finish defensive possessions consistently. That's where your games quietly get away from you. Free throws are another major divider here. Missouri is an elite free throw team, over 80%. UMKC is not. That matters late, it matters during runs, and it matters when games tighten. And then there's pace. This part is important. Ideally, Missouri and UMKC would actually want to play at a similar speed. And I'll get more into this later. But Missouri can win the game without it changing who they are. So when we put all of this together, efficiency, rebounding, free throw reliability, ideally, normally it'd be pace compatibility. The structural read is simple. If this game is clean, Missouri wins. Clean possessions favor Missouri. Clean sequences favor Missouri. A game where both teams simply trade execution advantages, that's a Missouri game. Which brings us to the only real question left. What happens when the game stops being clean? Because games usually don't stay clean for a full 40 minutes. We already know if the game is clean, Missouri wins. It's clear. But games don't stay clean. They move in sequences, runs, responses, missed chances, rush decisions. And that's where chaos profiles matter. Let's start with Missouri. Missouri is a low chaos team. They don't foul much. They don't panic under pressure. They execute late. And when they get to the line, they convert. That combination makes them very hard to knock off rhythm. They're not reliant on emotion. They don't need momentum swings to score. Their offense travels, and that's why they're favored at home. Now let's flip to UMKC. UMKC lives on a much thinner margin. They don't generate chaos themselves. They don't live at the free throw line, and they don't force turnovers in bunches. But what they can do is benefit from brief disruption. They can benefit from brief disruption. A missed rotation, a short shooting run, a couple empty possessions from the other side. Their shooting is the biggest variance lever. When the ball sticks, they struggle. When the ball moves, they can score in bursts. And we've already seen that against Arkansas. The danger for UMKC isn't missing shots. It's what happens after the misses. Turnovers, quick fouls, defensive breakdowns. That's where chaos stops helping them and it can start snowballing against them. So the chaos question here isn't can UMKC force it? It's can UMKC keep it contained? Because Missouri handles stress well. UMKC doesn't. At least not consistently. Once UMKC loses connection, it's hard for them to re-anchor. That means the early part of this game matters more than the late part. If Missouri creates separation early, UMKC doesn't have the structure to climb back. But if the game stays flat, if the score stays within a couple possessions, pressure starts shifting. Not because Missouri collapses, they don't, but because expectation creeps in. And expectation changes how possessions feel. Missouri wants rhythm. UMKC wants friction. Long possessions, no runs, no clean sequences back to back. So when we talk chaos in this matchup, it's not about volatility, it's about containment. Can UMKC contain the game long enough for shooting variance to matter? Or does Missouri's discipline smooth everything out before the window opens? That's the tension in this matchup. Not talent, not effort, structure versus disruption. And once you see it that way, the rest of the analysis gets much simpler. So now the question becomes very specific. What has to happen for UMKC to stay inside that window? First, the shooting has to be real. Not hot, real. UMKC doesn't need a volume night, but they do need efficiency. That means good shots only. Inside out threes, no early clock pull-ups, No bailout attempts late in the clock. Second, they have to protect the ball. UMKC cannot survive turnover runs. If they're giving Missouri extra possessions, the game won't stay flat long enough for anything else to matter. Third, they have to win the possession-ending moments. Defensive rebounds, loose balls, first contact on box outs. Missouri lives on clean endings. UMKC has to disrupt that. Fourth, free throws. Can't be a liability. They don't need to outshoot Missouri at the line, but they can't waste chances. Missed free throws are a silent momentum killer in road games. Fifth, the game has to stay small emotionally. No runs, no panic fouls, no chasing the score. If Missouri strings together 8 or 10 straight points, UMKC doesn't have the structure to erase it. And finally, this is the big one. UMKC has to stay patient even when it's uncomfortable. Long possessions, late clock decisions, trusting the next pass instead of forcing the next shot. If those things happen, the game stays alive. Not because UMKC is better, but because the margin hasn't exploded. And once you're still alive late, basketball does what basketball does. That's the window. Not an upset prediction, a pathway. Now, let's get specific and actually look at the stat sheet on that window. So for UMKC to stay in this window, we talked about the 6 conditions, and these are conditions, not preferences, not ideas. And if they let even 1 or 2 of these slip, the model collapses. So I just went over them briefly. Now I'm going to give numbers, specific stats. So the first one again is shooting has to be an outlier on purpose. It has to be real. UMKC needs to be at 48% or better from the field. They have to be at 48% or better from the field. And around 38% from the 3, with at least 6 made threes. Not volume shooting, efficient shooting. If this drops even slightly, Missouri's margin shows up fast. 2, again, is UMKC has to win the turnover battle. It cannot play an even possession game. They need to keep their turnovers at 14 or fewer. So UMKC has to get their turnovers 14 or less. And they have to force at least 18 turnovers on Missouri or more. Extra possessions are the fastest way to erase an efficiency gap. Third is free throws can't leak momentum. UMKC needs to get to the line as often as Missouri, and they need to make them 72% of the time or better. Now, this is the hardest condition. It's historically unlikely, but without it, every other advantage gets thinner. So it's an important one. Fourth, defensive rebounding has to be a wall. Missouri usually breaks teams by extending possessions. UMKC has to turn this into a one-and-done game. Missouri's offense rebound rate has to stay under 22%. No second chances, no broken possessions. Fifth, Missouri cannot get comfortable from the 3. UMKC cannot trade shooting runs. Missouri needs to be held to 30% or worse from deep with fewer than 7 made threes. Once Missouri starts stacking threes, the math stops working. 6, the game has to stay flat. No Missouri run bigger than 8. Nothing. Halftime within 6 points. Once Missouri creates separation, UMKC doesn't have the structure to chase. And all of that only works if the pace cooperates. This isn't about average tempo or what their tempo ideally would be. It's gonna be about tempo swings. UMKC doesn't need the game to crawl, but they cannot let it speed up. Once this turns into quick possessions, early offense, and transition sequences, Missouri's efficiency gap shows up immediately. Long possessions, late clock decisions, no rush after makes or misses. Pace doesn't win the game, but it decides whether these 6 conditions even get a chance. So here's the honest truth. UMKC doesn't have a sustainable path to victory. Their only win path is a perfect storm. Elite shooting variance, a turnover edge, free throw stability, defensive rebounding discipline, and Missouri regression all at once. That's why it shows up in roughly 1 out of every 20 simulations. But when it does happen, it looks exactly like this. And once you know what you're watching for, you'll know very early whether Missouri's day is about to get ruined. It's not a prediction, it's a disruption map. So this isn't about picking an upset. It's about understanding the map. If the game is clean, Missouri wins. If the game stays flat, possessions stay long. And those leverage points start stacking. Then UMKC stays alive. You'll know early which direction this is headed. This is the Metricality, where I talk data, not vibes.